Because they're filming this, I'll try to stay tethered to the microphone. I tend to wander around a little bit, but I'm going to try and stay to this. My name's Mark Batla, and the talk is Pittsburgh's Historic Ballparks. Most people know me with the black hat. I'm 6'2", 270, wear a black fedora. So you can see me about a block and a half away, and you have time to duck. So I make no apologies if you run into me. If you're on the north side or at a ball game, you see a large man in a black fedora, it's probably me. All right. So the talk is Pittsburgh's Historic Ballparks, and it is based on the book that I did in 2023, titled, oddly enough, Pittsburgh's Historic Ballparks. And it covers the history of the 9 ballparks that have hosted Major League Baseball in Pittsburgh, including the Negro Leagues. Now, it's not about the great players, the championship seasons. There are a lot of other books for that. What I discovered, I'm a lifelong baseball fan, but realized that nobody had really done anything on the history of the ballparks themselves, how they were designed, constructed, adapted over time. And there were bits and fragments, but nothing that was comprehensive. So I took it on to try and do that. And we'll talk about each of these ballparks so you don't have to memorize that list. This is north side of Pittsburgh, and north side was the cradle of baseball, is the cradle of baseball in Pittsburgh region. The first documented baseball game was 1857 under the Cartwright rules, the modern New York rules, and it was played in the Allegheny Commons, what is now the park on the north side. Has anybody ever been for an ice ball from Gus and Yaya's in the park? Well, this is directly across the street from the ice ball man. So if you're ever there getting an ice ball, you look across the street and you'll see all these big mature trees in the park. Well, 1857, there weren't any trees. It was just a big empty lot. And there were undoubtedly earlier baseball games, but the reason we know this one is somebody wrote about it in the paper the next day. So it's the first documented game using the modern baseball rules, the Cartwright rules, in 1857, the first game in the region. Also on this map, top left is Union Park, later called Recreation Park, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Bottom center is Exposition Park, and you can see that it partly overlaps the footprint of Three Rivers Stadium. Now, if you go down on the North Shore behind Stage AE, you will find a plaque in the parking lot, in the ground, that marks home plate for Exposition Park. And just a couple of months ago, we dedicated home plate, second base, and the pitcher's mound for Three Rivers Stadium. So they're marked in the pavement behind Stage AE. And also there, just like 20 feet from the Three Rivers Stadium baseball markers, is the site of the Immaculate Reception, also marked there on the sidewalk. So next time you go to a ball game, take a little detour to the west. So you can stand where Honus Wagner stood at bat at Exposition Park, and you can stand on second base just like Clemente did when he hit his 3,000. At bottom right, of course, is PNC Park, and just to keep the football fans happy, there's the footprint of Heinz Field, and what is it now, Are You Sure Stadium? What's new on this map is my house. My house on Beach Avenue was built in 1870. And one of the things I liked about my house, aside from the fact that my wife let me live there with her, was that it was walking distance to ball games at Three Rivers Stadium. And as I was walking the games, I was thinking, you know, the guys who lived in my house from 1870 to 1909, when the Pirates moved to Forest Field in Oakland, they were doing the same things I'm doing today. They're blowing off work or whatever their wife wanted them to do around the house, and they were going to a ball game. And that got me thinking, how was their experience in the late Victorian period similar to mine today, and how is it different? And of course, a lot of differences, a lot of similarities, but major difference was they were going to see baseball in small, compact wooden ballparks. I was going to watch baseball in a giant concrete bowl. It was a very different experience, and that's what got me thinking about, well, what were these ballparks? How did they come about? How were they adapted over time? So if you don't like the talk or the book, don't blame me, blame the guys who lived in my house from 1870 to 1909. It's their fault. All right, Union Park, roughly in Pennsylvania and Allegheny Avenue on the north side. It started off as a big empty lot and had a natural depression in the center. In the wintertime, the owners would flood the site with water when it got cold enough, and it would freeze over and create a pond. And then they would sell tickets for people to go ice skating. And they'd have bonfires and maybe a band around the edge. But it was a popular spot, but here is a newspaper ad from 1865 advertising baseball on the ice. I'm not sure how that works, but the point is, we're only 8 years after the first documented game in the region. And baseball has gotten so popular by 1865 that they're using it to draw people to an ice skating rink in the middle of winter. So what's happened in those 8 years to make baseball that popular? The Civil War. Now think about the life of a soldier during the Civil War. A soldier's life basically is weeks or months of sheer boredom in camp, where the only thing to do is march, drill, and dig latrines. That's interrupted periodically by a couple of days of sheer terror during battle. Well, there's nothing the soldier can do about the sheer terror, but the sheer boredom part, they take up this new game that starts sweeping its way through all the Union Army camps called baseball. And the players like it because it keeps them active, gives them something to do, and it's this sense of teamwork and camaraderie without, the chance of getting killed. And the officers like it because it keeps the men busy, and it keeps them from sneaking out of camp and going to gambling dens, bordellos, and bars. So baseball is strongly encouraged within particularly the Union Army. And so by 1865, when those soldiers come back from the war, what do they want to remember? They sure as hell don't want to remember the horrors of battle. But they remember the teamwork, the camaraderie, the participation, the activity of baseball. So when they come back from the war, all they want to do is play baseball, watch baseball, and talk about baseball, because that's the happy memory they bring back from the war. And so it's being used in 1865 as an advertising hook to get people to an ice skating rink. Very soon, baseball is so popular that Union Park is kind of leveled off and turned into an early ball field for the early amateur clubs, because all those soldiers start coming back and they organize their amateur clubs and baseball teams. Now, early on, who went to watch the games? Their friends, their girlfriends, their wives, sometimes both their wives and their girlfriends. But, it's mostly their buddies and their friends go and watch these early games. But it catches on and more people start going to the games. Now, at first, when you went to watch a game at Union Park, there were no bleachers, there was no grandstand, there was just, you went to watch a game, you sat in the grass. Maybe somebody put out a bench or two. But after a while, more and more people start to come and watch the games, and somebody says, if we put up a grandstand, maybe, some bleacher seats, put a fence around the site, we could charge people to watch the games. And the players said, yes, you could, and then you can pay us. And that's the way professional baseball grows organically in cities all across the country, is this realization that baseball has gotten so popular that people will pay to watch it, and that means the players can get paid. The first grandstand at Union Park wasn't much. We don't have any images or maps of it, but it only seated about 300 people. It's made of wood, of course, and it lasted about 6 weeks, and then it blew down in a windstorm. So I'm thinking the contractor got a lousy Yelp review for that one. All right, so those amateur clubs that are playing at Union Park, the first organized professional team with any standing or any real longevity is organized in 1882, the Pittsburgh Alleghenies. And they build a park down by the river on what's called the Exposition Grounds. Now, the Exposition building, built on the north side, roughly where the Clark Bar is on the North Shore, if you've been down there, back against the hillside. It was kind of a cross between a convention center and a trade show. It was to show off local industry and achievement. The grounds in front of the building, between the building and the river, became known as the Exposition Grounds because they'd use it for outdoor concerts and other activities. In the early 1880s, the first sporting use for the site was an oval racetrack for horse racing. And so in 1882, the Pittsburgh Alleghenies are organized. They play in the American Association, which was a major league at the time. And they built a grandstand somewhere within that oval. We don't know exactly where. We have no images or maps of it. But from the description, it was somewhere within that oval racetrack. Now, the problem is they built it, and as you can see, it's fairly close to the river. So they build this grandstand, and the grounds flood. And they played most of that season on this soggy field. You thought playing baseball on the ice might be hard. Try doing it in the swamp. So after the 1882 season, they throw up their hands and they move a little bit west and build a second grandstand. Now remember, it's on the Exposition Grounds, so being creative guys, they called the first one Exposition Park. Then they move a little west, roughly where Heinz Field is today, and build a second grandstand and call it Exposition Park. We now call them 1 and 2 just to keep it straight. The trouble with Exposition 2 is that it's even closer to the river and it floods. So halfway through the 1883 season, they actually moved back to Expo 1 because it's dried out more than the second ballpark. So they built 2 grandstands, neither of which are really usable. And so after the 1883 season, they move up to Union Park, where they build a double-deck grandstand, which we'll see in a little bit, and they rename it Recreation Park in 1885. But really, the beginnings of professional baseball are here. And the Pittsburgh Alleghenies later become the Pittsburgh Pirates. So the franchise that is the Pirates today began on that site in 1882. All right. Oh, by the way, notice that big wooden bridge that's connecting the point at the far right out of shot with the north side, what was then a separate city called the City of Allegheny. So the early Pittsburgh professional baseball teams did not play in Pittsburgh. They played in Allegheny. That's why the teams were called the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, the 2 sister cities kind of sharing the name. All right, this is the 1887 Alleghenies, and they're posed in front of the grandstand at Recreation Park. And this is the only known photograph of that ballpark during the time the Alleghenies played there. And this is their first season in the National League. So you'll often see Pirates stuff that the Pirates produce that say, they begin in 1887. Well, that was their first year in the National League, but the franchise actually started 5 years earlier because sometimes the Pirates don't understand their own history. Now, you can't really see much in this image, but this is the only image we have of the grandstand when the team played there. But you basically see vertical planks in front of the grandstand, topped by rail, and then you got some fans there photobombing the team picture. And the important thing to notice is they're sitting in curved, bent-back chairs, like Windsor chairs. This is before the time of fixed stadium seating the way we're used to today. There were actually individual chairs in the box seats, the expensive seats. And so guys had their own chairs, and it was only further back in the bleachers that you got bleachers or benches in the cheap seats. But so early images will show you these Windsor back chairs in the closer seats. Now this image is from a tobacco card that was inserted in packs of cigarettes as a kind of inducement to buy the cigarettes. And the ad on the back of the card is for Kalamazoo Bass cigarettes. Now, if any of you have one of these, bring it back and I'll happily give you $50 for it, no questions asked. Everybody knows the Honus Wagner tobacco card and how rare it is. This is far rarer than the Honus Wagner card. Only 4 of these cards are known to exist. So if you have one, you seem like nice people. I'll double my offer. I'll give you $100 cash. All right. Does anybody know the story of Fred Carroll's monkey? Good, you're all virgins. The legend that's been around for about a century or more is that Fred Carroll had this pet monkey that became kind of the team mascot. It would sit in the dugout with the players during games. It traveled on the road with them. The players loved the monkey. The legend goes that the night before the Alleghenies' first game in the National League in 1887, the night before opening day, the monkey died. The players got together, had a drink or two, maybe more, to toast the monkey, and then they snuck into the ballpark in the middle of the night and dug a hole and buried the monkey under home plate. That's the legend. Now, local baseball historians, including Len Martin, who did that book, have actually researched this, and what they've discovered is that in the off-season, Fred Carroll, who's the star first baseman for this team, Fred was in California with the monkey during the off-season. And before the season began, he was traveling back to Pittsburgh on a train with the monkey. And the monkey, somewhere in Colorado, died. And so they've concluded that it's highly unlikely that Fred Carroll was carrying the dead corpse of the monkey in his luggage all the way back from Colorado. And I said, well, wait a minute, guys. I said, railroads at that time had these things called reefers, refrigerated boxcars. They're basically a standard boxcar, but it was insulated on the inside. They had a big metal bin that they would put huge chunks of ice in. And they would ship meat and produce and other perishables in these refrigerated cars. I said, Fred Carroll's a star. It'd be like if Paul Skeens came up to you today and said, hey, bud, will you do me a favor? You'd say, yes, absolutely, whatever you need, right? Well, if Fred Carroll went to a railroad man and said, hey, dude, can you put my monkey on ice until I get back to Pittsburgh? He'd say, sure, no problem, Fred, I'll take care of you. So my theory is it's entirely possible that Fred travels back, picks up his monkey popsicle when he gets back to Pittsburgh, meets his teammates, has those drinks, and that they may, in fact, have buried the monkey under home plate the night before opening day. We can't prove or disprove this because soon after the ballpark was demolished, a big brick warehouse with concrete floors was built on that site. And it's still there. Now, many of us hope that one of us, local historians, will outlive the building. And if one of us does, you will find us probably in our 80s or later with a jackhammer and picks and shovels trying to dig up home plate and see if we can find any remains of Fred Carroll's monkey. So until then, it's a legend. Whether it's true or not, who can say? All right.
Hold on. What was the BBC?
Baseball club.
Baseball club.
Okay.
Pittsburgh Baseball Club. Baseball was often two words at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And by the way, if you do have any questions, just yell them out. I'll do my best.
Okay, just one question.
Yeah.
Are you going to hit it later? It said Pittsburgh Stogies. Are you going to address that later?
Oh, with the H or without the H?
No, Pittsburgh
What?
Stogies.
Oh, the Stogies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't cover everything in this, but the
Okay.
Stogies were a team that had been in Chicago, and they weren't drawing flies in Chicago, so they packed up and moved to Pittsburgh to the empty ballpark at Exposition 2, and were there for a couple of weeks, and then folded, because they didn't draw any more fans here than they did in Chicago. And there is more info in the book on some of these details. All right, whoops. All right, this is 1892. This is Recreation Park as it looked a year after the Alleghenies leave this park. So we think this looks pretty much like the ballpark did when the Alleghenies played there. But they actually moved to a third exposition park in 1891. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it being vacant in 1892, it was leased by a group called the Allegheny Athletic Association, or the 3As. It was called the 3As Park. Now they were an amateur athletic group. They had an amateur baseball team, football team. They had cycling races, various track and field events. And they leased the grounds to have all their athletic activities and play other athletic clubs from around the region. In 1892, they played their rival, the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, in a football game and played to a scoreless tie. So they set a rematch for November at their home park, the 3A's Park, what had been Recreation Park. And they played a football game in November of 1892 in front of that grandstand. Both the Pittsburgh team and the 3As were looking for an edge. So the star college player from Yale came to Pittsburgh, set himself up in a hotel, and sat there and entertained bids from the two clubs and said, I'll play for whoever pays me the most. Well, the 3As win the bidding. They paid this guy $500 in 1892 to play a single football game. He's worth every penny. He causes a fumble, scoops it up, runs it in for the game's only score, and the Alleghenies win their game against their rival. They also made a profit of $700 on the ticket sales, and God knows how much on their betting against the Pittsburgh Athletic Club. Anyhow, point is that the treasurer of the club writes all this down in the ledger for the club, and it says, paid $500 to play a game to William, you couldn't make this up, William Pudge Heffelfinger, who was the greatest college player of his day out of Yale. And so Pudge Heffelfinger becomes the first player that we have documentation that he was paid to play football. And it happened in front of that grandstand on the north side of Pittsburgh. That document is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and the Hall of Fame considers that the first documented instance of a player being paid to play football. But it's where the Alleghenies played up until 1890. And here's an 1894 photograph. This is the only known photograph of the whole grandstand. And this was discovered when a building up on Perry Hilltop was demolished in 2015. In the cornerstone of this building, built in 1894, was a metal box. And in the metal box were various objects from when the building was erected, including this photograph taken from the building site looking out over the valley below. They hadn't intended to get the ballpark, but they did. And so it's a terrible photograph. But basically there's the two-tier grandstand, flanked by bleachers, with a fence around the entire site. That's the only known image of Recreation Park, other than that one of the guys standing in front of the grandstand. We keep hoping something else will turn up, but this only turned up because it was in the cornerstone of a demolished building, and we only got it in 2015. All right, so Exposition 3. 1890 is a watershed year in baseball. The players were frustrated because they felt the owners weren't paying them fairly, and they imposed fines and discipline, and there was no appeal process. So they formed this first sports union, the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball Players. And the Brotherhood still got nowhere negotiating with the owners, so they went out and got investors and started their own league to compete directly with the major leagues. And so they got investors, and while the Alleghenies are still playing up at Recreation Park in 1890, they take the vacant grounds down on the Exposition grounds, and their investors build them a brand new ballpark in 1890. And again, they called it Exposition Park. We now call it Expo 3. But this grandstand was built specifically for the Players League team, and they're competing directly against and this is happening in all these major league cities across the country. There's a battle between the Union League and the established major leagues. Unfortunately, it's a financial disaster for both sides. Basically, baseball fans say, a pox on both of your houses, we're not going to any of your games. And so both the owners and the players lose their shirt. But the owners have deeper pockets than the players, so after that one season in 1890, the Players League folds. And that leaves this brand new Exposition Park vacant. Well, the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, they've got that lovely double-deck grandstand up at the Recreation Park, and they look down at this brand new one and say, oh, we'll move into that. We're like, guys, you just built 2 grandstands in the floodplain that you had to abandon. Why are you leaving your 5-year-old ballpark to move back to the floodplain? You know, they must have got some sweetheart deal, but so the Alleghenies moved into Exposition Park in 1891. And at that time, since the Players League is folded, all the Union Brotherhood players who jump from the major leagues to play for the Union teams, they have to go back to their original major league teams. To do that, all the teams in the major leagues have to send a list to the league office that lists all the players they claim they have the rights to. Philadelphia screws up their paperwork. They forget to list their second baseman. The Alleghenies say, hey, we need a second baseman. Somebody call Louis Bierbauer, see if he wants to play for us. Bierbauer, of course, says, are you paying me more than Philadelphia would pay me? I'll play for you guys. So he signs a contract to play for the Alleghenies. The sports writers, fans, and owners in Philadelphia lose their minds. The newspapers are railing. They say, this is horrible behavior. The Pittsburgh owners are not acting like gentlemen, they're acting like pirates. And the Pittsburgh sports writers and fans say, yeah, you're right, we're pirates and you ought to be afraid of us. Because after all, who the hell's afraid of an Allegheny? And they've just lucked into this fearsome nickname that they had never thought of. And by the way, it turns out much later, it fits way better on a jersey if you're going to sell suit than Alleghenies. But anyhow, so that's how the Pirates become the Pirates, is by, they're accused of stealing the second baseman from Philadelphia. The Exposition Park, the number 3 that was built, you can see in this image from 1899. And basically you see the trident bracing holding up the grandstand, the stair towers, there were a couple of them with pyramid roofs on top, and then kind of the early version of luxury boxes. A couple of rows of seats right on the edge of the grandstand roof. and they were only in a small section behind home plate to start with. But the field was also used for not just baseball, but also early pro football, for soccer matches, carnivals, Wild West shows, circuses. It was a very busy place, not only for baseball. This is a local pro football team, the Duquesne Country and Athletic Club. All right, there's Barney Dreyfuss. He buys the Pirates in 1900. He had come to this country along with other members of his family from Germany, and they settled in Louisville. His other family members got involved in the liquor business, and he in fact worked for I.W. Harper and other distillers for a while. But he wasn't really interested in the liquor business. He bought the National League franchise in Louisville, and he ran the baseball team in Louisville. Unfortunately, it didn't do real well, didn't draw a lot of people, and so didn't win many games. And so in 1899, he gets word that the National League is going to shrink from 12 teams to 8, and they're going to cut out the 4 weakest teams in the league. And Barney finds out that his Louisville team is one of the clubs that's going to get axed. So he doesn't want to be out of the baseball business. He gets up to Pittsburgh, cuts a deal to buy controlling interest in the Pirates. He then engineers a trade, sends his best players from his Louisville club to his brand new Pittsburgh club. One of those guys is Honus Wagner, who played 2 seasons with Louisville as a young man and had shown some flashes, but was not yet the great star that he'd become. But he comes up along with the other core of that Louisville team. And for Barney Dreyfuss, it works great. In 1900, they finished second. Then they win the National League pennant in 1901, 2, and 3, and play in the first Modern World Series in 1903. So Barney also reinvested in his ballpark. So remember those rooftop seats? Originally they were just behind home plate. Here you can see they've been expanded the full length of the grandstand roof. And he made other improvements to the grandstand. And he also added more bleachers and had other upgrades to the ballpark. He was constantly tinkering and trying to improve the ballpark, a practice that would continue after he built Forest Field in 1909. Here's the Exposition Park as it was seen during the first World Series in 1903. And you can see there the rooftop boxes, the full length of the grandstand. You can see a screen that kept balls from going out of the park, and the pyramid roof on the stair tower that was a defining element of the ballpark for many years. By the way, you'll notice in the picture there are no women. Ladies, it was unseemly for you to attend a baseball game at this time. This is a rough crowd. It's almost entirely men. A lot of gambling going on in the stands. A lot of salty language. They don't sell liquor in the ballparks, but every man has a flask. So you'll see few images of women in these early shots of ballparks. Here's the park as it seemed, as it looked at its biggest attendance, over 18,000 people in 1905. And the ballpark only seated 12,000. So how do you get 18,000 people into a ballpark that seats 12,000? Well, you string a rope in the outfield and sell standing room tickets. Ball hit into the crowd is a ground rule double. You sell those standing room tickets because you're not turning away a paying customer. And the other thing to notice here is you'll see some people at the rope, and then back here up against the wall, this whole other crowd of people, and that's because the field actually sloped upward from the warning track up to the outfield fence. So it was a rise. And all these people are trying to get back up as high as they can on that little incline so they can see over the heads of the people at the ropes. Also, you'll notice on the billboards, almost all the ads are for whiskey, because who's your audience? Almost entirely men. Come on, there we go. After the game, they drop the ropes, and everybody runs across the field. Now, today we have kids run the bases on Sundays, right? Back then, everybody ran across the field. They weren't picky about it. And where are these people running to? None of them got cars. They're running for the streetcars. Because they know if they don't make it for one of the streetcars waiting outside the ballpark, they have a long wait for the car to come all the way around again, or they've got a long walk home. And given Pittsburgh's topography, it's probably a long uphill walk home. So they're running like mad to try and get on the streetcars. Here's a view of Exposition Park from Monument Hill, what's now where CCAC, Community College of Allegheny County, is. And across the river, you can see the third exposition buildings at the Point downtown. And put a new club in there to compete directly with the Pirates as part of this new league. They hire a former star pitcher for the Pirates named Deacon Philippi, who was a star of the 1903 World Series. The sports writers therefore dubbed the team the Pittsburgh Filipinos. Deacon Philippi, Pittsburgh Filipinos. Got to be the weirdest sports nickname in history. Unfortunately, the United States League folds after a month, but the next year the Federal League takes up the effort, and they play for 3 seasons, 1913, 14, 15, and they also put a team into Exposition Park to compete with the Pirates. Unfortunately, this is opening day, 1913, and you can see the field is completely covered by water. The streets around the ballpark are completely covered by water. I mean, it was a mess. It was a ballpark built close to rivers that had no flood control. Here's its scene from downtown in 1915, its last major league season. And you'll notice a roller coaster at the Point. That's the exposition buildings. And here's the last known photograph of Exposition Park. We're not sure exactly when Expo 3 was demolished. Probably the grandstand came down earlier, maybe by 1918. The bleachers seem to have lingered on a little longer. The field was in use into the 20s. But the last known photograph we have is this one, where a murdered man was found on the grounds under the bleachers. And these are 2 city detectives examining the site behind the bleachers where the murdered man was found, giving us one of our last images of the ballpark. Now, it was still in use as a field. Art Rooney, the chief owner of the Steelers, in his office at Three River Stadium, he always had a big panorama photo of Exposition Park, because that's where he got his start in sports. He played baseball and football on the grounds at Exposition. Maybe after much of it, the structure had been demolished, but he was playing on the field at that ballpark. And so he kept that image in his office at Three Rivers as a reminder of where he got his start. So Ford's Field, built in 1909. Dreyfus is finally sick of the floods. And remember that wooden bridge? The 1907 flood wiped it out. And it not only flooded the ballpark by tearing out that bridge, it eliminated a major link for the ballpark to all the fans living in the Pittsburgh side of the river. And so Dreyfus gets serious about finding something from some site for a ballpark away from a river. There's a newspaper article in 1909 by, quotes one of the contractors, complaining all these crazy baseball fans wandering onto the job site to watch him build it. And he's like, there are hundreds of them. And they're showing up every day and just sitting there. And you can see them here. The seats hadn't been installed. The terraces for the seating had been built. But there are people just sitting on the unfinished seating terraces all around the park. There are people walking, standing, and they're there to watch them build the ballpark. Now think about it. There's no radio, there's no television, there's no internet. So what the hell else you got to do? And everybody knows that Forest Field is a big deal. Up until now, all ballparks have been made of wood. This and Shive Park, under construction at the same time, are going to be the first ballparks made of concrete and steel. So everybody knows this is a big deal, and they want to see it. So the contractor says, finally he gives up, and he just tells people, stay the hell out of the way. I don't want anybody getting hurt. Just, go sit on the bleacher areas. So it opens in 1909. This was the architect's drawing of the ballpark that appeared in popular postcards at the time. And this is what really sold Barney Dreyfuss on building Forest Field. That was the pretty picture that he was given by the architect. And that's pretty much what he got. This image, by the way, also is on the cover of the inaugural game program from June 30th, 1909. If anybody has a copy of that program, I'll happily give you another $100 for it. So you can make an easy $200 today just by bringing in those two items. All right. There's the exterior of Forest Field right behind home plate. That's the way we mostly remember it. That's the way it looked soon after the park opened. And they opened in 1909, and that year they go to the World Series. This pole stood behind the left field wall at Forest Field, and these guys obviously could not get a ticket. And I got to tell you, I'm as big a baseball fan as anybody. I do not think I would climb a pole to watch any baseball game, but these guys did. Now, I'm not sure how this worked. I mean, what if this guy says, I got to go to the bathroom? Do the rest of the guys climb down, and then do they wait for him to come back, or do they say, no, you move your feet, you lose your spot on the pole? But this goes to show you how popular baseball has gotten by the early 1900s. It is the thing to do, the sport to follow, and people are baseball crazy. So this is the way the park looked as seen from over Shenley Park when it first opened. And you'll notice there's nothing down the right field corner. And that's the way it pretty much looked until 1925, when Dreyfuss finally gets to expand his ballpark, and he adds the double-deck right field pavilion in that vacant corner down the right field line. And that's the biggest seating expansion in the history of the park. By the way, the Mary Shanley Fountain is still there in Oakland, so you can stand at that fountain and you can look out and imagine Forest Field in front of you as it looked back then. I said at the beginning, it's not about the great players or teams, but there's one exception. This is 1935, and that is Babe Ruth, after he's hit one of his final home runs at Forest Field. Ruth had been, of course, the star with the New York Yankees. He wanted to manage. The Yankees made it clear they wouldn't make him manager. The Boston Braves in the National League said, we'll make you manager, but you first got to play for us because I got to sell some tickets and we got to ease out our manager. Well, Ruth starts off, he's not doing well. He's sitting under 200. But when the Braves come into Pittsburgh to play games at Forest Field, Ruth catches lightning in a bottle one last time. And so on this day in 1935, he hits 3 home runs in one game, including his 714th and final home run, which he hits over the roof of that right field pavilion. Now remember, that was built in 1925. Ball players had been aiming at that roof for 10 years and nobody had cleared the roof. Ruth, at the very end of his career, on his last career home run, the guy can barely stand up and run around the bases. He hits the ball completely over the roof of the right field pavilion. Willie Stargell would later do it 8 times, but Ruth is the first. And he is seen here coming down the line to score after one of those home runs in his last game at Forest Field. He would retire about 10 days later. Let's talk Negro Leagues real quick. This is Central Amusement Park in the Hill, off of Wiley Avenue in the Hill. And it was built in 1920 and demolished in 1925. So there's not a whole lot known about it, a few images. In fact, only one image. And it hosted a Negro National League team in 1921 and 22. This is the only known photograph of that ballpark. And you can't see much, but basically a simple wooden grandstand at the top of a steep cliff, sort of random vertical planks to create a fence right at the edge of the cliff. And nothing was built there before the ballpark in 1920. Nothing was built there after it was demolished in 1925. So you can actually go to this site, stand on that site where the early Negro League teams played. Now it's just weeds and scrub trees and whatnot. But you can stand on that site and go, how the hell did they fit a ballpark in here? Probably that hillside over the last 100 years has continued to erode and shrunk the site somewhat. But we keep hoping more images will turn up of that ballpark. Here's an aerial from the 30s that shows the 3 Negro League parks in the Hill. There's the scar in the landscape that was Central Park. It's been demolished by that point. Top is Ammon Field, we'll talk about in a minute, and Greenlee Field, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you'll notice they're all within blocks of each other. Why? Because this is the center point for the African American community in the region. It's a densely built community, lots of folks who are your likely customers if you own a Negro League team. And so all the ballparks that are built to serve those Negro League clubs are in the Hill. The Homestead Grays would play a lot of their games at Forest Field, but early on they were using these ballparks in the Hill. Ammon Field was a city rec field. We have no photos of it and no maps of it. The only thing we have is this sketch from the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper in the 30s, because a murdered man was found behind the backstop. So I'm not sure what it is about guys getting killed on ball fields, but 2 images we have of rare images of ballparks are thanks to some guys getting killed on the ball field. So that's about all we know of Ammon. Greenlee Field was built in 1932. Yes, go ahead.
Did the Homestead Grays play at Homestead?
They play, we'll see where they play in Munhall in a minute.
Okay.
Greenlee Field, built in 1932. Gus Greenlee was sort of numbers kingpin in the Hill, and a group of amateur ball players who called themselves the Pittsburgh Crawfords. They came to him and they needed money for their little amateur club. He said, I'll back you, but I now own the club. And he went around the country and got the best Negro League ball players he could hire from all around the country, pushed out the local amateurs, and stocked his baseball team with one of the greatest teams ever assembled. So they win the championship in 1935. And this is them in 1936 in front of their bus, which was a big deal. And they're parked in front of Greenlee Field. Now, Greenlee Field, built in 1932. There's a state historical marker out front of the thing that says, first Negro League park to be owned, designed, and built by African Americans. First in the country. It wasn't even the first in its neighborhood. Central Park, Central Amusement Park, which we only have that one image, was owned, designed, and built by African Americans. It was owned by a guy named Alexander McDonald Williams. He hired a local black architect named Louis Bellinger. Bellinger in turn hired black contractors to build it. But the key is Williams owned it. Greenlee only owns 25% of the ballpark that had his name. His white partners, who originally owned the land, owned 75% of the ballpark. So he did not, in fact, own the ballpark that carried his name. He owned the team, but not the park. But he hired the same black architect, Louis Bellinger, who had designed that wooden park earlier. He now designs a brick ballpark. And those arched openings, that's leads to the stairway that goes up to the field, because the field was built above sidewalk level. This is the interior of Greenlee Field, and it never had a roof, so it was kind of open to the sun and rain, which eventually cut into attendance. But at first, it's very popular. It is an important social gathering for the minority community in Pittsburgh. And ladies, remember when you couldn't go to ball games? Yeah, look at this crowd. There are little girls in the front row. There are lots of women here in their fancy Sunday hats. This is now very much a family affair and a social gathering place for the African American community. It did very well for a number of years, but one big problem, aside from the lack of a roof, was that Greenlee, who's black, his white partners won't let him hire African Americans to work at the ballpark. So you'll see in this picture, this 14-year-old white boy with a bucket. What's in the bucket? Come on, guys. Beer! It's either bottles and ice, or it's simply a pail of beer, and he has a ladle and paper cups. But he's a beer vendor. He's a little white boy. In front of him is an elder white gentleman in a straw boater. He's either an usher or a supervisor, maybe there to keep an eye on the 14-year-old beer vendor, but he's a white guy. And the story is, and read this documented in stories in the Courier, Greenlee's partners would not allow him to hire African Americans. So folks in the Hill said, Gus, you're happy to take our money for tickets, but you can't hire your own people. And he said, my hands are tied, my partners won't let me. And that begins to erode attendance. By 1938, the city decides they need to build more housing, and they want to build public housing. They already own the site of Ammon Field because it was a city rec field. And so they go to Greenlee and his partners and buy Greenlee Field, and Bedford Dwellings now stands on that site. It's public housing. Without Greenlee Field, the Homestead Grays need someplace else to practice. They play most of their games at Forest Field, but they play occasional games when Forest Field is not available. They play elsewhere. And so in 1937, the Borough of Munhall builds Westfield in Munhall, out behind the municipal building in Munhall. So if you know Munhall at all, the municipal building is still there. And if you go behind the municipal building, you'll see a ball field and a stadium that's used for some college sports and I think high school football. It is, however, not the original grandstand or field. It's on the same location. But that's the way it looked when it was in use by the Homestead Grays. And this is how it looked in 2015 before it's demolished. It had been long abandoned for the structure of the interior rooms, but the seating was still used for things like high school football and whatnot. It has since been demolished, and while there's a new stadium there, nothing remains of what was originally the Negro Club. Back to Forest Field, 1938. Barney Dreyfuss has passed on, but his son-in-law runs the team, and he remembers that every time Barney Dreyfuss put money into his ballpark, he made a lot of money by going to the World Series. He figures they got a good team, they're going to make the World Series in 1938. They're going to need more seating for media. So he builds the Crow's Nest on the roof behind home plate, and it becomes a very defining element of the ballpark for years to come. Unfortunately, they don't make the World Series, and it just becomes regular seating for fans. And there it is, seen from the interior. 1947, the Pirates signed Hank Greenberg, who had been a slugger with the Detroit Tigers, but had served in the Army for 2 years during World War II. And Greenberg's got a little older and been out of the game for 2 years. To help him hit home runs, they decided to shorten the left field wall. And so you can see they're digging the post holes for a fence 20 feet in front of the left field wall to shorten the distance for Greenberg. And it works. I think Greenberg hits 22 homers of that year, 18 of them at Forest Field. But then he retires after one season. And for that season, it was called Greenberg Gardens. It, however, also helps a young player on that team, a guy named Ralph Kiner, who goes on to lead the National League in home runs for 7 straight seasons. And so that shortened left field becomes known as Kiner's Corner. After Kiner's traded in, I think, 54, the fence is removed and it's restored to its original dimension. But you can see it here in this area, the way the fence came out and ran parallel to the outfield wall. Uh-oh. What the heck happened? Oh, there we go. All right. This is one of my favorite images of Forest. This is behind the left field wall. If I had a time machine, I want to sit with these old timers in Shenley Park out behind the wall. They can't see the game, they can hear it, they can enjoy the sound and ambiance of the ball game, and probably swap some stories about Honus Wagner. But I just love that image of Forest behind the left field wall. The Honus Wagner statue, dedicated in 1955. You see Honus at the bottom in the car. That statue, of course, now stands out behind, outside of PNC Park. The thing about Forest Field is it was in a neighborhood. This is right outside, across the street from the home plate entrance at Forest Field. Now, when I gave this talk at one library, a guy comes up to me before the talk and says, "Oh, I was a kid, my dad took me to Forest Field when I was a kid." He says, "But they didn't sell beer in the ballpark. So before we went in, we'd always have to stop at this place across from home plate and have a beer." He had to have his beer. He said, "I'm a kid, I just want to go inside, but Dad has to stop and get a beer." Well, he doesn't know I have this slide in the image. Afterwards, he comes up and he goes, "You know, that might be me and my dad standing there at the home plate cafe. That's where we were before every game he took me to." After I did this talk, another guy came in and said, "Well, I grew up in Oakland." He goes, "When I was 14 or so," he said, "I would go to that hot dog stand, and I would get like a box top, and I would buy as many hot dogs as I could fit on the board. And then I would go inside the stadium and sell them in a market." I'm like, "So you're a 14-year-old entrepreneur?" He says, "Yeah, because that's how I got money to go to the movies or to other ball games, was I would buy their hot dogs and go in, because it was cheaper to buy from him inside." And so he was a little entrepreneur.
Is that the
What's that?
Is that the O?
No, I don't believe it is.
I see hot dogs and
Although it does have the same name. It wasn't at the site of the
it was, yeah.
Now this is the way we mostly remember Forest Field. This was Mazeroski's home run in 1960. And it kind of froze Forest Field in our memories, like it's in amber. But the ballpark that Honus Wagner saw was very different than the field that Babe Ruth saw. That was different than what Ralph Kiner saw. And that was different than what Mazeroski and Clemente saw. Because the ballpark had a 60-year life and had a lot of adaptations and evolutions over that time, which are covered in more detail in the book. Here's Demolition 71, which exposed the steel framework of the ballpark, including the ramps that were novel in 1909 and made it possible to move large numbers of people in and out. Soon after World War II, people were talking about replacing Forest Field, and so there were a number of ideas thrown around. This is an early design concept, and you can see they were thinking about view quarters downtown. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. here it is being seen from downtown while it was under construction. And here it is at the end of its life, seen from within the construction site of PNC Park. You can still stand at PNC Park under that arch and look out over the North Shore and imagine Three River Stadium out there in the distance. Did anybody go to the implosion, by the way? You did? Yeah, I lived 5 blocks from there, and I did not get up. I heard it, I was in bed, and when it went down, that was the stadium. Here's an early planning model from PNC Park, and it almost slavishly copied Forest Field. So it's got all these elements, like these arches at ground level, the windows on the upper levels, a lot of things that copied what Forest Field was. The design obviously evolved quite a bit from those early planning models. So if you compare that model to what was actually built, you'll see there are dramatic differences. But we wound up with, one of, if not the best ballpark in America. Well, that's it. That's the book. I could run you through like 50 images. There are over 200 in the book. And obviously I can only kind of scratch the surface on some of this stuff. And the book gives you far more detail. The book's available here if you like. I have it. It's $25. I throw in the autograph for free. That book was so well received. People said, well, what about the football, hockey, and basketball venues in Pittsburgh? So I wrote the sequel, which came out in March of this year, which covers those pro football, hockey, and basketball venues. And it's also here and available. So that's it. That's a postcard from the early 1900s when the Pirates were still at Exposition Park. And so you can decide whether I made a hit. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, there's some vintage items on the table. You guys can look at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I have the book. There's also some other items that one of our attendees brought folks to look at. Let me just say, they make great Christmas presents, great Father's Day, birthday gifts. I mean, you can get your Christmas shopping done way early. So I'm making a living $25 at a time. Yes, sir.
Do you get into how people thought Sophie Maslow was kind of off her rocker?
Yeah. I was around during that, and I knew Sophie. And I'm like, well, she's pretty brave at that. I'm not able to cover it in the book. Yeah, it was kind of an interesting time because she was definitely kind of ahead of the rest of the crowd on that topic. And pleased to say I knew her. I can't say I ever talked to her about the ballpark. Yeah, she was way out ahead and took a lot of flack for it. So it was only, maybe a decade later until Plan B gets passed and all that stuff.
How about, do you have any details on how deteriorated Three River Stadium was? The fan couldn't see what was going on underneath, but my understanding is it was in really bad shape.
Oh, Three Rivers?
Yeah.
Well, let me say, every one of these parks, Forest Field included, when it gets to look like it's the end of their life and it's going to be replaced, the team just stops maintaining it. And Forest Field was really bad because it was bought by the University of Pittsburgh in 1958. It wasn't abolished until 71. The Pirates don't move out until 1970. Nobody thought it was going to live another 12 years as a home of a major league club. So everybody stopped repairing it and improving it and maintaining it. So by the late 60s, it's kind of sad. Three Rivers got some of that, not quite as bad, I think, as Forest Field. Yes?
Dead center at Forbes is 457.
Yes.
Are there any statistics that maybe Stargell would have X number of more home runs in his career if it wasn't 450? Because that was the...
I'm sure somebody's done that analysis.
Thought his wife.
But what's that?
Thought his wife may have done that.
Oh, yeah?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. It was the center field was so deep that for many years the Pirates kept the batting cage in play in center field. They rolled it up against the wall in the outfield and left it there during games. That's how far it was. They figured nobody's going to hit it that far. But yeah, there's no question Stargell would have probably done more home runs. On the other hand, it made for a great hitters team for a ballpark for average. Don't forget Clemente hit 314. Partly, I think, helped by the fact that the field was so big, the outfield was so large.
I never sat in the left field bleachers at Forest Field.
Yeah.
But it looked like you couldn't see, they were lower. Could you see the home plate?
So when it's the question about the left field bleachers, when the park is first built, you could see past the box seats, but over the years, the Pirates kept adding onto the front of the box seat area because they couldn't expand backwards and they had a huge foul ground, so they kept sort of expanding the box seats, which then began to obstruct the view from the bleachers.
I
But
never
I
wanted to
guess-
sit over there.
Yeah.
I never
Right.
wanted to not see home plate.
Right, and I think part of it was the team figured we'll make more off the extra box seats than we'll lose off of the bleachers. But it's one of those things where as the ballpark evolves, it does change the experience for some people, and that's one of the things. It was even worse for football, though, because if you look at the lads for football, like in the second one, you'll see those bleachers are like a mile away from the field. So watching a football game, you could see it, but it was a long distance.
If you sat in the regular stands, you could either see pitcher's mound or shortstop because of
The poles.
The poles.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why ballparks like Three Rivers came about, was to eliminate those obstructions. Yes.
I was actually in Forest Hill with my dad. He took me 10 times at least. And I never sat in left field in the bleachers for a different reason. I said, we're going where Clemente is. And that's where Randy,
Right.
he said, great. I said, he'd love that, but he goes, what about the bleachers? No, you gotta watch Clemente.
Yeah, everybody wanted to pack up that right field corner because you got to see Roberto in action.
When did fans quit wearing suits to the game?
One of the things about looking at some of these early images, you can also see the evolution of hats. So they're like fedoras, then there are straw boaters in the 20s and so on. So you see this evolution of hats for men, and then hats start to disappear entirely. So yeah, it's not only suits, but hats, and entire changes over time. And when you do see a woman in some of those early images, they're in the full Gibson girl outfit. I'm like big dress, big giant hat. I mean, when you do see a woman, she's fully Victorian attire. But I couldn't pinpoint, I'm not a haberdashery expert.
I guess when they worked in the factory, the sweat you would do, the game was less than in the factory.
Yeah.
Gentlemen had ties on.
Well, any other questions? I'm here, I'm happy to sell books.
I just want to mention,
Yes.
since it looks like some of these guys grew up with me with Clemente. The movie just came out last week.
Yes, yeah.
And if you haven't seen it, it's really good.
You've seen it? I haven't seen it yet. Yeah, I'm hoping to
Is
catch
it
it.
at any actual theaters?
Yeah, I know it was over at the Waterworks in Homestead, or whatever that place is.
Yeah, it's in a number.
I
of
saw it at the
theaters.
Brian, and Luis Clemente was there, and producers and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty nice.
It's
And
on
by the
TV.
way, if
It's
you-
on TV too. I mean,
What's
there's
that?
been on like A&E or.
I think it's the History Channel.
Or is it History?
It's either A&E or the History Channel, but it's
Probably the
on
History
next
Channel.
week.
Next 23rd.
Supported.
Also, if
You're gonna see it
you're
first.
free, October 13th, in front of the fragments of the outfield wall at Forest Field, they replayed the
Yes.
radio broadcast of Game 7, 1960 World Series. And I gotta tell you, you should do it someday if you're a baseball fan. Because there's several hundred baseball nuts just sitting there in this scrap of the park in front of the wall, listening to this radio broadcast and reacting like it's all happening now. Okay, like when the Pirates take lead, yay! When they fall back, oh, and acting like nobody knows what's going to happen at the end. But yeah, do that someday. It's well worth it. I'll probably be there with the book, of course. But also in Carnegie, there's a lovely Hannes Wagner Museum in downtown Carnegie. So if you ever get a chance, go Main Street in Carnegie, you'll find the Hannes Wagner Museum. They've got a variety of
You get to hold a bat that he can.
Exactly, you get to hold a Hannes Wagner bat, and they'll take a picture. Yeah, so don't strike out. All right, hey, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
We'll also take over the board.